She cried when she realized I wasn't angry. I was done. Not in the fiery way people expect after betrayal. Not with yelling or slammed doors or desperate pleas. Just done. A silence so absolute it echoed louder than any scream she might have expected. That's what broke her in the end. Not my rage, but my peace. I remember the exact moment. The lighting in that restaurant was soft, golden, romantic. The kind meant for anniversaries or proposals. But that night, a year ago, it framed the end of something instead. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine when she said the words, I don't see a future with us, Jared. Like it was some casual admission. Like I wasn't already designing our future with her in it. I sat there, stunned, as the waiter awkwardly cleared our plates, the remnants of a meal I no longer remembered ordering. My heart didn't shatter. It shifted, quietly, internally, like a building cracking beneath the surface before anyone notices. I didn't argue, didn't ask her to reconsider. I just nodded once and stood up. That was the last time we ever touched. What she didn't know was that I would never try to win her back. I wouldn't fight for someone who didn't believe in me. And I wouldn't bleed for a woman who needed time to decide if I was worth loving. 6 months later, I walked back into that same restaurant. Same velvet chairs, same warm lighting. But everything felt different. This time, I wasn't sitting across from heartbreak. I was sitting beside Lena, whose hand in mine felt like the answer to every ache I once had. I hadn't planned on Amber being there. I didn't know she'd be seated just across the room, wine glass trembling in her fingers as she caught sight of me, dropping to one knee. In that moment, time folded. The scene rewrote itself. Where she once said goodbye to a life she couldn't picture, she now watched it come to life in front of her. I gave everything she said she didn't want to someone who wanted nothing more than to build it with me. And this time, I was the one who couldn't see a future with her, because mine had already begun. A year ago, Jared Monroe sat across from the woman he believed would be his wife. The place had been chosen carefully. It was the restaurant they always came to for celebrations, anniversaries, birthdays, quiet little victories. He'd booked the same corner table they once laughed at the idea of reserving for life's big moments. That night, he thought he was creating one of those moments. He even wore the navy jacket she loved, the one she said made him look like he had his whole future figured out. He thought they were aligned, until she opened her mouth and unraveled everything. I don't see a future with us, Amber said, her voice level, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed far too many times. Jared didn't respond right away. Part of him was waiting for the punchline, some ironic smirk, or a soft laugh that would dismiss her words as a bad joke. But none came. Amber's eyes were focused somewhere over his shoulder. Her hands remained folded neatly in her lap, like she was bracing for turbulence that she caused. His throat tightened. Not because he didn't expect a rough patch. They'd had those before. But because this wasn't a fight. This was an exit. She didn't cry. She didn't waver. She didn't even look sad. And that, more than the words themselves, is what shattered Jared's world. She was already gone. Her body was sitting at that table, but her heart had checked out weeks ago. Maybe months. He wanted to ask why. Wanted to understand what changed. Was it the way he worked late building their future? Was it how he never once hesitated to support her dreams, even when his own took a back seat? But none of that left his lips. He realized, even in the middle of his unraveling, that her mind was made up. His questions would only become burdens, and he didn't want to be pitied. So he nodded. A single, quiet nod. He paid the check. He stood, and, with a hollow, "Take care of yourself," he walked out, not just from the restaurant, but from the version of himself that would ever beg to be chosen. The following days were a haze. He went through the motions, work, meals, sleep, but it all felt distant, like watching someone else's life through frosted glass. It wasn't the loneliness that hurt the most. It was the grief for a future that would now never be. The unshared holidays. The children he thought they'd name together. The home they'd never fill with laughter. But Jared wasn't a man who lived in ruins. He gave himself space to fall apart, but not to stay there. Therapy wasn't a magical fix, but it helped him rebuild from the inside out. Session by session, he peeled back the layers of misplaced guilt and finally saw what he'd refused to admit before. Amber didn't leave because he lacked anything. She left because she couldn't recognize what she had. And slowly, his healing wasn't just survival. It became transformation. He began running again. Not to escape, but to move. He reconnected with old friends, took solo trips, and started saying yes to things that used to scare him. Life, for the first time in years, stopped being something he was trying to hold together, and started becoming something he could actually feel again. Amber, meanwhile, remained a memory, a lesson, a chapter closed not with bitterness, but with a finality that felt earned. Jared didn't check her social media, didn't wonder who she was seeing. He wasn't trying to erase her. He was simply choosing not to chase ghosts. What he didn't know was that Amber, in her quiet corners, had begun to look back. Not out of love, but out of loss. She thought he'd wait, thought he'd stay suspended in heartbreak, orbiting her absence. But Jared wasn't orbiting anyone anymore. He was already walking toward someone else. Someone real. Someone waiting to meet him halfway. Healing wasn't a straight line for Jared Monroe. It was a quiet evolution, not an event. It didn't arrive with a grand revelation or some cinematic moment of closure. It came gradually, through small, unnoticed victories. Waking up without a heaviness in his chest. Making coffee without associating it with her favorite mug. And laughing, truly laughing, at something without guilt. By the time Lena Moore entered his life, Jared had already begun to find solid ground beneath him again. He met her at a bookshop tucked between a cafe and a flower shop, an accidental detour on a rainy Sunday that changed everything. She was kneeling in the aisle, reaching for a copy of Letters to a Young Poet, the same book Jared happened to be reaching for. Their fingers touched, and she looked up, smiling with a sincerity that disarmed him instantly. There was no spark of infatuation, no thunderclap romance. What he felt was steadier, calmer. She radiated something he hadn't felt in a long time: presence. Lena wasn't trying to be impressive. She wasn't performing or holding back. She was simply there, and in her presence, Jared didn't feel like he had to prove his worth. He could just exist and be seen. Their first few conversations were cautious, not because either of them had walls up, but because they both understood the value of slow beginnings. She talked about her work as a teacher, about how she loved watching her students discover who they were through literature. Jared found himself telling her things he hadn't shared with anyone in years. Not secrets, but reflections, thoughts he hadn't realized were even inside him until Lena made space for them. It didn't take long before their Sunday bookstore meetups turned into dinner dates, hikes, evenings spent on his porch with glasses of wine and conversations that stretched deep into the night. Lena never asked for more than he could give, but she always made it clear she saw all of him. She didn't flinch when he talked about his past. She didn't compare. She didn't try to fix him. She simply met him where he was. For the first time in a long time, Jared wasn't holding his breath. He wasn't trying to be enough. He already was. It was Lena who taught him the difference between being chosen because someone was finally ready, and being chosen because someone had always been sure. She wasn't filling Amber's place. She was carving her own. Jared found joy again, not in big declarations or social media posts, but in Lena's quiet gestures, the way she squeezed his hand during difficult conversations, the way she remembered little details, like how he liked his tea or which side of the bed he couldn't fall asleep on. She listened. She understood. She stayed. And Jared, piece by piece, gave her what Amber never saw the value in, his full heart. Not as a gift of recovery, but as a choice. Jared didn't choose the restaurant out of cruelty. He chose it for closure. It had taken him weeks to finalize the proposal plan. Not because he wasn't sure about Lena, he was. In fact, he had never been more certain of anything. But when it came time to decide where to ask her to be his wife, the answer rose to the surface, without resistance. That place, that table, that memory. It wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about reclaiming it. The upscale Italian restaurant hadn't changed much in a year. The same white linens draped across tables, the same soft jazz notes floated through the air, the same flickering candlelight added warmth to the atmosphere. But Jared was not the same man who had sat there 12 months earlier, stunned and heartbroken. He was steadier now, whole, and the woman beside him didn't carry doubt in her eyes. Only devotion. As they walked in, Lena's hand laced gently through his, her smile radiant, unaware of the emotional weight the place carried. Jared had told her it was special to him, but he hadn't said why. Not yet. Tonight wasn't about the past. It was about what came after. They were seated at the corner table. That table. Jared's heart beat a little faster. Not with nerves, but with purpose. He reached under the table and brushed his fingers over the velvet box inside his jacket. Lena was telling him a story about her students and how one had compared Shakespeare to Taylor Swift. He smiled, not at the story, but at her. At this life he'd built with someone who brought light, not confusion. Then he felt it. A shift. Movement in the corner of his eye. He turned his head slightly and froze. 2 tables away, seated across from another woman, was Amber. She hadn't seen him yet. She was glancing down at her phone, idly stirring a drink with a silver straw. Her face looked the same, but her expression carried something else now. Something heavier. Her posture wasn't proud. It was poised in practiced elegance, but tired. Jared blinked slowly. For a moment, he considered what to do. Then Lena reached across the table and touched his hand. "You okay?" she asked gently, noticing his stillness. Jared turned back to her. "I'm perfect," he said, and he meant it. He rose, from his seat, came around the table, and knelt on one knee before the woman who had never once hesitated about loving him. Across the room, Amber looked up, just in time to see the box open. She watched Lena's eyes widen with joy, watched her hands fly to her mouth, watched her nod through tears, watched Jared slide the ring onto her finger. For a moment, time fractured, 2 parallel realities colliding. But there was no explosion, just silence. Amber couldn't breathe. She had said she didn't see a future with him. And now, she never would. As the restaurant's soft piano melody played on, Jared stood beside Lena, her hand now adorned with the ring he'd chosen weeks earlier. A simple, elegant band with a single diamond that sparkled not from size, but from intention. She was still wiping away happy tears when he leaned in to kiss her cheek, whispering something only for her. She laughed, nodded, and they embraced, basking in their private little moment, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that others were watching. Amber was one of them. From her table across the room, she sat frozen. Her fork hovered uselessly above a slice of tiramisu that now tasted like dust in her mouth. The wine she'd been sipping idly a moment before had turned acidic on her tongue. She wasn't sure how long she'd been watching. Time had blurred. All she knew was that the man she once dismissed as too steady, too predictable, had become someone else entirely. Jared hadn't become colder. He had become clearer, stronger. Everything about him now, the way he carried himself, the tenderness he showed Lena, the ease in his smile, was unrecognizable from the man she left behind. He wasn't performing. He was simply living. And none of it had anything to do with her anymore. When their eyes met, just for a second, it felt like stepping into cold water. Sharp. Inevitable. Jared didn't glare, didn't smirk, didn't acknowledge her with anything more than a quiet, steady gaze. There was no anger in him, just a kind of peace that stung more than rage ever could. Then, just like that, he looked away. Amber blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself. Her friend, seated across from her, leaned in slightly, whispering, "Are you okay?" Amber nodded too quickly, like the lie needed to outrun the truth. "Just needed a moment," she murmured. But that moment was already gone. Jared and Lena walked out hand in hand, stopping at the host stand briefly, likely to thank the staff. As they exited into the night, the soft glow of the restaurant doors closed behind them. Amber remained seated, watching the space they left behind like it might rewind and offer her a different ending. It didn't. What she was witnessing wasn't revenge. It was replacement. Not of her, but of the life she could have had, the one she once held in her hands and deemed unworthy. She had thought Jared would wait, that she could take her time, explore, test boundaries, and return when she was finally ready to commit. But people don't wait forever. Some heal, some grow, and some, like Jared, give everything they once offered you to someone who didn't need to lose it to recognize its worth. As the server returned with the check, Amber signed without looking, her signature shaky. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have, and somewhere deep in her chest, where certainty used to live, regret began to bloom. Not loudly, not violently, but in quiet, steady ache that would never quite go away.